Welcome to Buckle Up, I'm Jasper and this is the BMW i3. The i3 is arguably BMW's first proper hatchback because the 1 Series that preceded it was just an estate that had had the back chopped off. Having said that, I think it looks a little bit more like an MPV from the side. And I say that because it's quite a stubby car. The front end has been squashed in, the windscreen is quite far forwards, and the whole chassis is raised up. Released in 2013, the i3 had a somewhat controversial, albeit fresh-faced design that does still look modern today. Now this is the range extender model, which means it comes with a small 2-cylinder engine in the boot and a petrol tank. This allows you to top up with fuel and a generator will charge the batteries up as you drive along. The front end styling is classic BMW really. You've got your kidney grills here, but they aren't grills. The actual air intake for cooling is down here. And it's got quite a scowly face, if I'm honest. The headlights are slightly downturned, and I imagine that's probably to give it a slightly sportier appearance. The chassis on this model is entirely made out of aluminium and carbon fibre. It's the first mass-produced vehicle to have that feature, and as a result it does seem that panel gaps around body panels meeting that chassis have suffered slightly when it comes to size and quality. The side profile of this car is quite tall, and it does actually look like there's only one door here, which would make this a, well, 3-door car, but it is in fact a 5-door vehicle because the rear doors open backwards. This car has suicide doors on it, making it, I guess, the MPV electric equivalent of the Mazda RX-8, except you'll be able to drive more than 4,000 miles in this without your engine blowing up. The styling of the i3 is interesting, to say the least. The wheels on this model are disgusting. I really do not like them. They just look like a glob of silver. It's very lazy design work in my very humble opinion. The waistline is interesting. It has this odd dip in it, which I imagine increases visibility for short people sitting in the back, so children can look out a bit better, but it does give you an unconventional side profile, shall we say. As this is the range extender model, at the rear of the car, the generator and some of the batteries are underneath the boot floor, and that means that this i3 only has a capacity of 260 litres in its boot. That's nearly 100 litres less than the A-Class I reviewed whenever the video went out. The load height and flat floor mean that in this car it is quite easy to tailgate, obviously a classic pastime of the BMW driver. One thing I do quite like are the frameless doors. The rear of this car is a strict 2-seater, and widthways there is a decent amount of room. The floor is quite high because the batteries are underneath it, and that means that even me with my slightly short legs, I can't quite get my feet in a comfortable position on the floor. The other issue with being in the back of this car though is to do with access and rear doors, and that is because the rear door can only be opened if the front door has been opened already. To demonstrate this, imagine you were being dropped off at, say, school as a child, and you're in the back because, you know, you're a child. Parent or guardian is driving and you are pulling up to get out. You're in the back, they're driving. How do you get out? Well, it's not that easy. You've got to reach forwards, get this door open, and then you can open this door and get out. It's a bit of a faff, quite frankly. Sitting in the front of the cabin, you do get MPV vibes, and that's because the windscreen is very far away from you, but it does give you a very airy feel to the cabin, and your front and side visibility is excellent. The cabin has a good amount of storage space within it, with big door pockets and a couple of cup holders in both the front and rear. The glove box is quite small. There's room for the owner's manual and a couple of other bits and bobs, but it's not the largest glove box I've come across. The dashboard has this lovely eucalyptus wood veneer on the top of it, and the materials on all of the touch points are very good. If you venture past the regular touch points, such as the door handles and armrests, you do come against some questionable materials. There's some nice leather on the door card, but some of the materials are recycled, which is good for the environment, but it's got a kind of unfinished fiberglass vibe to it. That and this door panel is disgustingly scratchy lower down. The interior of the cabin is relatively standard, although you are missing the centre console, and part of that is down to the very flat floor that this vehicle has, and the shifter for the gearbox is electronic, so BMW have mounted it up next to the steering wheel. Park is a button here, which is relatively easy to access. However, the start-stop button is not so easy. That is a button located awkwardly between the steering wheel, and is it one that you're meant to push with your thumb? Are you meant to reach through? I'm not quite sure. I personally would not have put it there. The indicators, not that this will matter to any BMW owners, don't self-cancel, which is slightly annoying to those of us who do like to use them when we're driving. The switchgear in here is standard BMW, however the air vents are mounted lower than they usually are, and the iDrive system has the smaller screen. You might have expected a larger screen in a futuristic vehicle, especially at the kind of price point this was while new. The seats in this are lightweight and surprisingly skinny, but this does not actually equate to rear legroom if you have longer legs. The seats are trimmed with what I can only describe as rhinoceros skin, because BMW seem to have chosen a very textured leather to use as upholstery. Now we've had a look around the car, let's go for a drive. And remember, before you do that, to buckle up. This car is incredibly smooth to drive. The electric power means that you get your torque instantly, so it's very quick at gaining momentum and speed. The regen braking is surprisingly sharp, actually. As soon as you lift your foot off the throttle, you feel that regen kick in and start charging the battery up. The driver's instrument cluster gives you a handy indication of whether you're using power or charging the batteries as well, which is quite nice to see as you're driving along. It's definitely possible to drive this with only one pedal, because as soon as you lift off, you feel that regen kick in and you do start slowing down. The regen braking feel that you get is a lot stronger than any kind of engine braking you experience in a combustion car. The driving position in this is excellent. The visibility all round really is very good. The rear could be a little better, but you have a good gap between the headrests, and the upright driving position means you can see a decent amount through. The torque in this is very good at pinning you into the back of your seat. The electric motor produces around 270 Newton meters of torque, which is not a great deal actually when you compare it to performance cars, but the fact that it is all available instantly from 0 RPM means that it feels a lot more than that. Being a BMW, this definitely does handle pretty well, especially given the upright nature of the car. The steering feels very direct and it does dart about very well. The size of the i3 is comparable to something like a Ford B-Max, except the cabin feels a lot bigger, but the boot is a lot smaller. It's a very quiet experience driving this. Obviously you don't have an engine humming away, although even when the range extender generator does kick in, that is still a very quiet background hum. Driving this car is almost eerily quiet. At urban speeds there's very little actual road noise, and the only noise you get is a little hum from the electric motor and a small amount of wind rush, and then the hum of the tyres on the road. One thing that definitely does annoy me is the indicator. The fact it doesn't click down into position it's just slightly odd, and it means you have to cancel it by flicking the stalk in the opposite direction, which yes is what you do in a normal car, but why couldn't they just design a stalk that sits in the place you leave it in? Despite the fact you sit high and this is quite an upright car, it doesn't actually detract too much from the driving experience. The fact that most of the weight of this car is below the floor level in the form of the batteries means that it is actually surprisingly good in corners and when it comes to handling. The alloys in this are a large diameter, they're 19 inches here, but the tyres are surprisingly skinny, and that reduces the contact patch on the road, which does lead to less grip, but crucially it leads to less rolling resistance. And in an electric vehicle where you're trying to eke as much range out of a battery as you possibly can, the less resistance you have, the better. The wing mirrors in this are very large. They give you an excellent view of the road behind you. The side repeaters are positioned on them, as is becoming increasingly more common with modern cars. This vehicle also has auto wipers and lights. The climate controls are easy to operate, and this car has heated seats as well. The materials used in this cabin are, as I said before, very good. Even though this car is now 8 years old, it still feels very fresh and modern. The material choices and placement do definitely add a nice level of class to the interior. At standstill, this vehicle is essentially completely silent. There's a slight hum from the battery's cooling system, but it's nowhere near as noisy as an IC engine car. You can gather speed at an alarming rate in this car. You just need to flex your right toe and you can be pinned into the back of your seat. 0 to 60 takes 6 point something seconds. I cannot quite remember the exact time, but it's the 0 to 30 where this car is really impressive. If you're sensible in this, you should see somewhere in the region of 120 miles of range out of the battery pack. If you then couple that with the range extension, you can definitely get another 100 or so miles out of the vehicle. When working, the generator makes nowhere near the amount of noise the engine in a petrol or diesel car would make. So that means that even when you are topping up your battery level, it's still a very quiet driving experience, just with an additional faint hum coming from the rear. Confusingly, despite the fact the generator is located in the boot, the fuel filler flap for it is actually in the front quarter panel. And then on both sides of the car at the rear you have an electric charging port. The seat in this is very comfortable, the driving position is good, visibility is brilliant, and despite how high up you sit, it does actually feel surprisingly good on the road. And that, for a car which is in essence designed to be used in a city, is pretty decent. There's very little roll in the suspension, but despite that, the ride is surprisingly supple and imperfections in the road aren't felt very much, which is high praise given the size of the alloys this vehicle has. Having the range extender model does mean you actually lose that range anxiety, because you are confident that even if your electric power is drained slightly, you will still have the generation of the engine to keep you going. The cabin feels spacious, and the driving position and driving experience are nothing but positive, if I'm perfectly honest. The power on tap is fantastic. The way it gathers speed is surprisingly addictive, and the general feel of class in the cabin is excellent. The material choices are somewhat unorthodox when it comes to a couple of the areas, but they add to a kind of quirky nature that this car seems to possess. And that quirkiness comes down to the styling, the fact it's an electric vehicle, and the experience. It's quiet and smooth, and it's an experience that I guess is, well, when this car was released, was definitely uncharted territory for BMW. It was the brand's first electrically driven car, and they did a good job of it. So, the i3, with its quirky, futuristic styling that admittedly is not to everyone's taste, is a surprisingly competent and capable all-rounder. It can hold its own at higher speeds on the motorway, is relatively exciting to drive on twisty country roads, and of course urban driving in anything electric will always be a breeze. The rear doors are admittedly impractical, but a real-world range of over 200 miles can make up for this. All in all, it's a good car, and I would recommend it. If you made it this far through the video, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Check out our links in the description. You can find us on most social medias, and also have a look at our merch.